Okay, welcome. We are here to talk about responsible AI and your projects. This is our scheduled session right against the keynote of Build. We are glad you're here, and we're glad that you're going to probably catch up on Build as the day goes on. We are really excited to talk about responsible AI, and you'll notice a lot of content that runs in a very similar lane to what you'll see people like Sarah Bird talk about at Build this week. So this is a very effective complement to what you're going to be hearing from some of those sessions. So today, what we are going to talk about is a couple things on responsible AI, but I want you to introduce myself first. So my name is Nathan Wisnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer. You want to connect with me on LinkedIn? There is my QR code. Hit me up. I would love to talk with you. I'd love for you to see the content that I'm producing every week on AI. We have a weekly newsletter that's centric to AI content, and many more pieces of content that I think you'll find very useful. So connect with me, follow me on LinkedIn, and we'd love to have some conversations after this for you to be able to continue to learn in this space. So what will you learn in this session? First, we're going to talk a little bit about what are the common AI concerns that cause people to be interested in having governance and having safety and having responsibility around their AI adoption. We're going to talk about what AI program lanes look like. So how do companies structure themselves to be able to gain ground? We're going to talk about the stages of AI operations and how you move from POC to pilot to production, and where different sets of capabilities need to be in place in order for you to be a responsible AI adopter. And then we're going to talk about AI safety and how, as you build these systems, you need to put in place controls that enable you to ensure that appropriate responses are going back to your internal or external customers. And we'll talk about a couple technologies that exist in order to be able to make that happen. As we're having this conversation, by the way, put your questions in the chat. So there's a healthy chat function in this webinar. So put them in the Q&A, put them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them as we go along. And as we are engaged in having these conversations, I'd be happy to follow up at the end as well. So shoot them over as we have them. Okay, so I'm going to start this conversation by talking about what are the general concerns that cause us to require responsible AI in the first place. So one of the first concerns that people have around adopting AI in their organization is the concerns around data privacy in and of itself. So I speak with executive teams about 2 to 3 times a week regarding their adoption of AI in the alignment with the mission of their business. And one of the first things they have concerns around is, wait, like, if I start layering AI into my applications or my platforms, the way that I work, is that being used to train some new version of a model? Is it being used for purposes that I don't have control over? How do I think about who has access to that information? And those are all excellent concerns. The first question you need to ask yourself as you're going down the road of adopting AI's capability within your business is, how are people making money off of this relationship? So if you think about some of the services that you might be using, like M365 Copilot or building a system that's running on Azure, in those instances, you're paying a license fee or you're paying a consumption fee. And there's a commitment that commercial data protection surrounds those usages of AI. So it's a sort of safe adoption from a data privacy standpoint, at least as far as like retraining other models is concerned, of leveraging that AI platform, because that's how your exchange of value works. However, if you're using something like the free instance of ChatGPT or you're Googling something, how do those companies make money? Well, Google in particular makes money by selling your information to market things to you. So there's a delineation between whether something should really be considered private or not. And in the sort of internal sense, it's absolutely considered private, and that's part of the relationship that you have. But these other senses, it's not. So you want to make sure that as you're going down your path of implementing a responsible AI system or practice within your organization, that it's being adopted in a way that puts in place the guardrails of giving those safe alternatives to some of those external scenarios. Because as Jurassic Park says, life finds a way, right? People will find a way to use AI if you don't give them safe alternatives. The second item that's directly connected to internal data privacy and essentially providing data effectively is data readiness in and of itself. So what I find many organizations are stuck on is this idea that my data is not ready in order for me to be able to leverage AI in an effective way. In some cases, that's true. And that means that investment needs to be made to be able to implement the necessary controls and platforms and capabilities in order to surface the data that's necessary for their use cases. In other cases, it's not. In other cases, their data is very ready. So there's opportunities for that data to be surfaced more quickly. But governance needs to be placed around that because oftentimes that data is centric to certain types of people who need to be answering those questions or receiving answers for questions or taking action, whereas that data might not be for someone else. So we need to be very cautious about how data is exposed. Same kind of situation as things like M365 Copilot. Is the 10 years worth of documents I have in SharePoint and the historical security controls I placed around that sufficient for me as I adopt M365 Copilot? Probably not. Probably not. So as you're going down that path, you're finding that you need to implement different controls even in the M365 Copilot adoption to be very successful with that. So lots of great things to think about in that lane. And then the third responsible AI in governance tier is this idea of human displacement, or you might turn it around and call it human enablement. But you can't really talk about responsible AI without talking about how AI impacts every person. And if I were to stress one thing for you in the context of this conversation, it would be every person in your organization has the opportunity to be more as a result of AI. And that message needs to come out as a result of not just IT. That message needs to come out as a part of your executive message back to the business. And the best businesses are the ones that are getting ahead of that message. They're thinking about it in the context of the skills attached to the roles of every person in the business and how they drive effectiveness as part of their adoption pattern. So human displacement is definitely a thing. It's also an enablement opportunity for us to be able to drive this as a force multiplier for every person. It's also a need to train and engage people, because if there's one thing I've seen from this is that adopting AI skills, especially delegation to AI agents, is not an intuitive thing. It's not an intuitive thing for people to take a task they're doing right now and hand it off to an AI agent and do it in an effective way. Let me give you an example of that. We've all learned to Google. We've all learned to Google by putting in many senses, like a lot less words than we would typically put when I'm describing this to another person, right? Because we just know that, like, if I stress certain words, I get the kind of results of the websites that might have the answers to things that I'm interested in. However, with generative AI, with copilots, more information is better. More context is better. Just like if you're talking to a person, giving them more context is better. I don't give them a 3-word search result or a 3-word search question. I describe for the person the thing I'm trying to accomplish, and that additional information is valuable. So why is this responsible AI? Well, because it's enabling people to be able to accomplish what it is that they actually are trying to get done. And it's enabling them to have the skills necessary to perform those kinds of tasks. So if I teach people not just a prompt, but I teach them to be able to interact with an AI agent in an effective way, in a sense, in helping them to interact with an intern over here that's like growing in that person's capability over time. So human enablement is probably one of the most important things about AI enablement, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. We're also going to talk about how do I mitigate quality hallucination controls that might be problems. So, like, is my AI platform answering questions appropriately? Hey, responsible AI, key problem to think about, right? How am I building a system that answers my questions, that is protected against many of the security kind of issues like jailbreaking or someone moving around my system prompt to be able to do things they shouldn't be doing, or even just answering it wrong, and it indicating it's getting it from source material, but that source material doesn't actually exist. So we're going to talk about some tools that can mitigate those problems and build some stability and confidence around the platform itself. And the last and very highlighted area of responsible AI is just its impact on people via bias that's ingested into the data and then made present within the model itself, or the way that the system interacts with people. And that can creep into a lot of scenarios that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So, like, I was working on a project with a company that did a lot of apartment management. Okay, so like they owned apartments, they were managing apartments, and they were trying to predict occupancy rates for different locations using different sets of data. And very quickly, they found out that like there were certain data points in there that they shouldn't be using as components of how they're doing that prediction because of the way that it started to align different types of human groups and socioeconomic factors that shouldn't be built into that kind of experience. So we have to think about bias in a way that's very relevant to the experience that we're building, and building one that really that provides the best results for all people, not just certain subgroups. So all of this is going to be part of our conversation today, and looking forward to sort of digging into each element. Okay, so as we talk about program lanes, you may have seen this before if you've been in some of my other sessions. I think it's important to understand how we're now talking about this section, right? So we have two different lanes that would exist in our adoption. We have our commodity lane, which think about that as is AI capabilities released from products that you're buying, SaaS products, M365 Copilot, GitHub Copilot, things in Salesforce. There's all these capabilities that are being released as parts of the products that you have. It's very much about adoption, less about building something. And then this top lane is very much about understanding the very nature of the business, understanding how I'm pivoting my business to be more digital in nature or augmenting it with digital capabilities, either in revenue production or operations, and how AI enables that mission of the business. And on that, a lot of times you're building a semi-custom solution or a fully custom solution in that space. And for both of these lanes, we need to be thinking about how responsible AI fits into this picture. And that's human enablement, it's outcomes that are governed and managed, and the balance between enablement and control. And never can you kind of have them unbalanced, right? Like too much control and you don't get anything done, and too little control and you're generating answers that aren't even successful answers, and you're building 10 versions of the same Copilot, right? So you end up with this sort of problem of not having your sort of arms around the usage of the AI technology. So successful organizations are thinking about how they create an AI center of excellence or enablement organization that's job is to shepherd the organization from this previous era to this new era. Like if you knew the era of the internet was coming to a business, or the industrial revolution was coming, you put a lot of intentional energy behind that. This is very similar to those two changes. We have to put a lot of intentional energy behind how our business navigates that shift, and to do it proactively. So we'll talk about how that all fits in. So I'm going to I found this is sometimes a little detailed for people in the sort of business zone, but bear with me for a second. If you're in the tech space, I found this to be super helpful for people. And as we're starting to talk through some of these types of responsible AI use cases, I want you to have an understanding that like it fits across a lot of subcategories of how this is being talked about. And as you're thinking about different tooling that you use to serve different problems, you'll notice that the responsible AI has different sort of points of view across these different structures. So one example of responsible AI is using the right tool for the right job. So you can see here an example of how, as I move from commodity to mission driven, and as I move from lower degrees of precision and greater explorability to more specific and accurate ML models that have less explorability and more specific answers, you can see how responsibility in these answers, responsibility on this, it fits in different boxes. So if I'm sitting up in this public AI space, it's really about when my employees are using public AI, are they using that in a way that is wrapped with commercial data protection? So what they put into public AI isn't making its way out into the like retraining ecosystem of the rest of the internet. So that's where things like Microsoft Copilot, which you might recommend as recognize as Bing Chat Enterprise or copilot.microsoft.com. If you have an M365 tenant, you can essentially use a private version of a ChatGPT or a private version of the Copilot experience that is not used to retrain models and is not exposed out to the internet, that can gain those fast answers. But that's an example of governing what tools people use and what tools don't people use. And then the second box, governance and responsible AI, here is more about how do I ensure that when people are using Copilot, they have access to only the information they should have access to, because we've done the oversharing report. We've locked down certain areas of the SharePoint site that just we don't even want included in the semantic index. And we know how to enable people to get the best results from their questions of data in the corporate corpus and other senses. So we're really driving toward making sure that people have the right kind of outcomes from the right data that's available to them. And then as we move down to semi-custom use cases, this is when you're building things on things like Copilot Studio, and you're enabling very specific tasks like returning information from a HR system or putting a chatbot in front of ServiceNow. And in those senses, sometimes like they're very internally focused and good is good enough. Like, but you also are setting some guardrails that like the types of use cases you're allowing your team to build inside the semi-custom space might have to fit into certain degrees of criteria. Because when you get into fully custom use cases, like next best action or a chatbot that's exposed to your end customers, we've seen the failures of when people have done that poorly. We know that the bar goes much higher in terms of the kinds of outputs that we can expect or should expect from that platform. So if I were to start from scratch, it's solve the right problems, understand your why, then move into, so start with the why, then move into the what, then move into the how. And this is starting to get into the how conversation, right? The how conversation of guiding your team members into the right zones of where they should be doing their work. So as we double click into that, realize these are all part of the same ecosystem. So as you're building a set of different AI capabilities, another reason why responsible AI is really important is all of these fit together. So if I'm using M365 Copilot and I built a custom chatbot in Copilot Studio that it's moving questions over to answer as a skill, and then maybe I've even built a fully custom solution that Copilot Studio hands off to answer back all the way back to the Copilot that I originally answered the question. You start to see how this forms unique Copilots or unique even agents that are related to each other and answering related questions. So tons of opportunity to be able to create really interesting outcomes from your governed environment, but also realizing that like you don't want everyone to create the same chatbot, right? I was talking with a company, they were going to have hundreds of chatbots, right, for different purposes, but they really want to make sure that they only build each one once, right? If I build it for customer service for this particular lane, I don't want someone else to like go do that because they exist in a different region. Like we can build something that's inclusive across the whole organization. So let's move this into talking about what operationalization as a responsibility looks like. So and particularly I'm talking about fully custom solutions, but it also kind of fits into the semi-custom solution space as well. So as we're talking about fully custom solutions, what you should know is that as you move from a proof of concept to MVP to a full operationalized system, the bar keeps going up of what you should expect. And what I often see is that a system that was built for POC suddenly is in production and none of the rest of this work has been done. So it's in production, it's doing stuff, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work, or someone's left for the day, or the answers aren't appropriate. And it's because the rest of this activity hasn't been done to make it successful at fulfilling a true operationalized platform. So POC, you're getting your data, you're doing some basic feature engineering, you're doing ML development, you're creating a model. When I go out to do envisioning sessions, I always ask the people I'm working with for some internal documents or customer service support documents and different things that I could feed into a chatbot that I could use to create a pilot, like not even a pilot, a POC for this executive conversation. And it takes me an hour to build that. And the funny thing about it is like there's the gap between a completed demoable system as a POC and an actually usable ML ops oriented system is a big jump. And it doesn't always feel like it because you got that demo out fast. But the rest of this infrastructure is really important. So think about, I got a POC in place. I then have to start iterating on that. And I have to build rigorous controls around serving infrastructure, how I test it, how I do validation, and then how I automate the release and how I monitor the results and how I pull those results back into the feature engineering activity. So I continually have this loop of how I'm capturing what's happening with the system. And then I have the actual configuration of the system and the metadata management. And all this fits together in terms of creating this cycle of how I manage it over time. So what you'll notice in some of these forthcoming slides will be everything I do now, it has to be built on the idea of operationalizing the environment. And true responsible AI is baked around that maturity that has to exist to do that well. So how do we build a safe AI system? Like, how do we build a system that is successful at being fully operationalized? Well, this is a breakdown of kind of what the overall cycle looks like. You have this initial ideation activity that's happening. This is a cyclical process, by the way. This isn't like one, it just leads to the other. We have this ideation, exploring, figuring out what to do. That was sourced from a business need from the internal and external customer. And most of this then exists in this building and augmenting system that then facilitates the movement into operationalizing the environment. We're going to focus most of our energy for this conversation on how we build a system and put kind of guardrails around the building of that system that starts to take care of many of these controls that we need. And on the sort of either side of that is the why are we even solving this in the first place? And have I built up the sort of MLOps cycle that supports that? And both are necessary, but we're going to focus most of this conversation on this building and augmenting zone. So when you think about building an environment, and we talked about many of these in our previous conversation, the foundation models we're using create all sorts of capability. You know, I think about this like when I say that there's a very specific answer to a question, and I ask, like I used to just look at an FAQ document and it contains this answer, right? Why do I not, like if I had an FAQ site that had 2,000 frequently asked questions on it, me being able to browse and interact with that site would be really complicated, right? So like be almost unusable, which is why FAQ sites are usually like frequently asked questions, maybe like 5 questions, right? Like the 5 things I most often answer. However, I could ask a person who has all that information and they could quickly answer it for me. Why do I know that they knew the answer? Where in their brain does that exist when they answer that question? We're certainly learning more about the human brain, but like just the idea of like where that exists in the brain, like is it my right side or my left side? Like what neuron fired to do it? Very complicated, right? So the idea of saying, wow, like now that I have this ability for generative AI to do these very incredible things in terms of how it leverages my information to answer questions in a human-like way, it also creates these question marks of how did it answer that question, which makes all of these potential harms things that get highlighted, right? So ungrounded outputs, like if a person doesn't know the answer to something, sometimes they're upfront about that, sometimes they aren't upfront about it, sometimes they say things like might or might, may, or probably. We always inject these little elements, right? Well, AI tools need to be built to do a lot of the same things, and we need to control those kinds of answers as well. If an AI platform doesn't know, I don't want it to provide an answer which is an inaccurate answer back to you. Jailbreaks, one of the more common things, like getting it to reveal its system message. There's so many ways that you could sort of get around and harm these platforms if you don't have the appropriate controls put in place. We'll talk about some of those. Harmful content, like answering questions that just straight up shouldn't answer because it's harmful. Copyright infringement. Microsoft has done a really good job on this from like a large language model standpoint of putting some legal statements in place that they're actually liable for the usage of the GPT models versus you. But you could also say, like, am I using someone else's copyrighted material in my grounded content that I'm not allowed to use? And then more like manipulative behavior that we need to think about. So all these are controls that are problems, these are harms that we need to mitigate. So how do we mitigate them? As we think about our responsible AI practices, how do we mitigate harms and maximize benefit? Well, there's different control levels that exist at each spot: the model, the safety system, the metaprompt and grounding, and the user experience itself. And this is the responsibility of the platform, and then this is the responsibility of the application. They have to play a part together to be able to accomplish our goals. When we first got into AI, we started with data scientists that were building things like demand inventory forecasting models, but very quickly this became a conversation of building AI systems, building AI applications, not just AI models, right? A model needs to be served, it needs to be used. So we need to think about our responsible AI in 4 different major contexts so we can put the governance around it. So the first mitigation layer that we need to think about is the model itself. And that's essentially inside the model, there's a set of controls of what it will answer or not answer. And you'll have to judge some of your model adoption based upon what are the security layers that are built into the model. So you can see that, for example, GPT-4, GPT-4o has more mitigation layers built into the model itself than, say, what early 3.5 or 2 had. And certainly that's the case with many of the other like small models or large models you can get that are popping up on Hugging Face and so on. There's many different possible models you could be using. And you need to consider like what controls exist in the model itself before I even go outside of the model's own controls. The second is the safety system that surrounds the model. So safety system meaning like, have I started to build controls around the actual model that starts to mitigate certain issues? So, for example, some of the things that are starting to exist within the OpenAI platform on Azure, but also in front of other types of models. This is, well, I'll take a step back. Safety system meaning this isn't actually limited just to OpenAI. You could use many other models in association with this as well. And this is saying things like severity scores associated with different types of content. I'll show you that in a second. The ability to put different types of sort of mitigating different types of harms and putting different options, high, medium, low, on different types of harms. The ability to put in place block lists, the ability to have content filters associated with different types of safety. So we'll show you this in a second. So here we go. So this is an example of putting filters in place into a safety system before they are surfaced for your platform. So, very things that people have definitely shown systems are providing problems with, right? So if you ask your model to talk about self-harm, for example, and you certainly don't want it to do that, right? And you can even put in the meta prompt, like, you will not talk about this and you will never talk. These are some controls I'm going to put in place. But even with that, you might find that it doesn't all, people can kind of work their way around it via a lot of just sort of complicated prompting techniques. So what's happened is, and we built this, it's interesting how fast this is accelerated, because when we first started doing this, we had to sort of build the safety system, right? So like, you ask a question, and what happens is that goes to the model returns an answer, right? What we've had to do is essentially shim between those two things a safety system that would block and manage certain types of content. So we would just build that ourselves, right?
Nate, I hate to disrupt you here, but people are not seeing the deck. I can see it okay, but is there anything? I'm getting messages and I was trying to share the deck, but I see it, so I'm hoping that we can, maybe there's an issue there.
Oh, thank you. I'll reshare it. Let me just reshare to make sure that shows back up. That's not good.
And I've got some people who can see it, so just make sure that we.
That's showing up now?
Okay, we've got people saying it's visible. And we'll be, just so everybody knows, we'll be sending this PDF out to everybody who's on here today afterwards, just so you have it. Thank you so much, Nate. I'll let you get back.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, well, that's a great stop. Thank you for telling me that. Okay, so what you can see here is varying different levels of user prompts. I'm glad you can see it now. Varying different levels of protection and prompts. And then you see even layered into that are additional types of filters. So like, and what Microsoft is doing is building things like prompt shield for jailbreaking, specifically looking for protected materials where there might be third-party material that is not something you should be using, like a song or a news article, or code that's protected materials and that's coming from code. So all of these are things that are starting to get built into this new layer that's going to exist between the person and the model that's answering the question. And this also is going to be something that gets injected around like groundedness. So that is this answer actually coming from the source material? So being able to check for that kind of answer and being able to validate that that is something that is really coming from the source material, which is something that's essentially like a groundedness score. So indicating, did that come from the right place? Did it not come from the right place? What you'll notice in this previous item is you have the ability to input certain sets of tests, right? So you can even sort of feed it a preset of tests or a preset of sort of test material to look for these kinds of mitigatable problems without you having to kind of come up with the tests. So there's a lot of options to be able to have it look for it and then validate it and give you a score against how well is your system already mitigating for these and where should we be setting the threshold level. So my stark recommendation would be don't build a custom AI system without having these kinds of filters in place, especially now that it's productized within the sort of OpenAI platform. So this is an example of Shell. They did the same thing. This actually existed before the Azure AI content safety, but they essentially said like anything that's going into production, we are building our AI content safety moderation feature that exists between you and it. And the job is to make sure that that pipeline exists. And to a degree, that may be something necessary for your custom system based upon the knowledge that you want to make sure is protected. And you'll see a couple examples of that in these successive conversations here, where like those very strict governance rules were built in addition to the safety system to be very controlled around what this will answer, what it will not answer. And that's another like very important control would be, especially as you're building external systems, something that's being put in front of your customer, this is sort of obvious to say, but it's important to note, is you want to be a little bit more, or not even a little bit, a lot more focused on it answering exactly the kinds of things you want it to answer and everything else being blocked off. You're not building the next chat GPT. Well, at least not for most things. You're building a ability to answer questions against manuals or to interact with your tax return or whatever it is, right? It's specific to a job to be done. Focus on the job to be done. Don't make it too broad because that's where some of the risks come into play. So this allows us to start about, in addition to the safety system we just talked about, building in metaprompt and grounding controls. So what is a metaprompt framework? It's to say my system message for my platform needs to define what my system does. And what you can, I'll show you this in a second, that what like a model without a effective metaprompt framework is much more effective, is much more risky because it's easier to compromise. You haven't told the system what its intent is. You just left it sort of blank, right? So it's going to allow a person to do more unnecessary things or inappropriate things with your platform than if you had built the right metaprompt framework. So you can see here, we're defining the model's profile and its capabilities. We're defining its output format. So we're not allowing our customer to be as creative with how we'll output content. We're being very specific about what we let it do. We're defining examples of what people can do with the model. And then we're saying, here are the behavioral and safety guardrails that you are held accountable to. In a sense, you're describing this like you would describe it for a person. This is like if you said, hey, you're hired at my company and this is your role. So you have these capabilities. You're going to answer questions about this truck. And when you answer these questions, you want to answer them professionally with this format and this style, with this template. And when you get into difficult situations, I want you to escalate to this person or this process. And then you aren't going to answer questions about these kinds of things. I don't care if you have an opinion on it. That's not about our company. So you're not going to answer these questions. So you're defining this box under which your platform interacts. So how this all fits into prompt engineering is these are examples of what that might look like. So you are saying you must not generate content that is harmful to someone physically or emotionally, or here's our grounding control. Your answer must not include any speculation or inference about the background of the document. You must not assume or change dates or times. You're indicating things that it can't do. Now, somebody's like, why would it do that? Well, it's just these are emerging best practices in terms of how to do this well. And how this all fits into this is you're essentially creating metaprompt templates to enable responsible AI across your systems that you build at scale. And what's the result of that? No instruction with a concrete and well-defined set of tests to try to take advantage of a platform has a 97% defect rate if, with a person that knows what they're doing, right? If you put no instructions, to leave it baseline, you're going to put them in a position where your platform is very easily compromised. If you are telling AI not to do something, you start to drop that defect rate. If you tell it not to do something, but to do something else instead, so you're not just saying don't do something, but you're saying to do something, you are continuing to reduce the defect rate. But then if you give it even more information, like if you say, don't talk to strangers. Well, we have a lot of strangers, right? There's strangers that we interact with. But if you say, don't talk to strangers except in this situation, and if it is this sort of thing, I want you to go here. Go find a police officer. Go find mom or dad. Like you're giving the instruction as to what it's intended to do. So if you then take this ability to build an appropriate metaprompt framework, you combine that with the safety system that's looking for all those other harms that is the shim, and you have the model protection, you really are, and then you build in groundedness protection, you're really building a system that is very safe. But if you don't include any of these things, you can see why responsible AI is so hard, because the base system many people build will be unsafe, and it needs to be built in a way that is safe. And then that brings us to the user experience itself. So as you expose this to a customer, the way you expose it is going to have different controls or thoughts or ways to make it effective for them. So it's about being transparent about what it does, about its role. So one example would be always indicate that this is a AI agent. It is not a person. And this, I don't know why people keep doing this, but don't give it a human name. You could have a name, but don't, you can see some of them have been built, they actually have a person, it looks like a person. And it sort of encourages this idea of anthropomorphizing the platform. You want to be very cautious about how you expose it in the way that you think about it and the way you interact with it as a person, right? So as you build these systems, it's better as a assistant, a copilot assistant, where the human knows what this is. And there's a very clear way to escalate to a actual human. So you have a path forward to move from this sort of bot-centric engagement, AI-centric engagement, into a human-centric engagement that is clear that this is an AI agent. And also put in place certain sort of validating statements that indicates what this is going to do successfully and what it's not going to do successfully. And then as you get to the point of providing results, reference citing is a really important component of this. Always showing them where they can go to get more information. So when it does provide an answer, here's where you go to get more about what I just told you. So you can be very successful in not only tracing back the answers to the source material, but using that to be able to learn from how your bot is responding to, or bot or agent that's performing tasks, to be able to be manageable, monitorable, and improvable versus a black box. So all that goes to then evaluation and an action that you would probably call red teaming or blue teaming plus red teaming. And this is essentially building the controls around your responsible AI practices to say, I'm going to test this system. And when I test this system, I'm going to look for opportunities for us to improve it by probing the system. So I'm looking for these before someone else is, right? I'm looking for the system to be probed for different types of potential harms via a set of tests that run on an ongoing basis. And this is another component of the platform I showed with the shim. You can actually build tests that keep running against your platform and look for these harms and are then able to mitigate. You're able to know that they're happening and mitigate them versus it being something that is sort of continuing on in time. So you're instructing and building an automation of those probes. You're enabling to measure them, and then you're building that into prioritized feature improvement for your external chat application. And again, as you move down into that space where the agent or the chatbot or the AI platform you're building has higher levels of criticality and engagement that's necessary, your governance of those practices like this are going to be important to making this very successful. So this is a sort of screenshot of that, where you're taking question and answer with context, and you're building that into our evaluation that looks for these different types of metrics. So groundedness, you can see this is the groundedness metric. It's looking for, is it actually answering from the source material? Is it fluent? Is it concluding risk and safety problems from our tests? So we're building out this metrics that we're going to evaluate our system against. And then you can see how we're starting to look for those kinds of those rates of problems from the batches that we're running, and then using that to be able to improve the way that our system interacts with people so we can mitigate like embarrassing situations that are very preventable. This is an example of what that output looks like, providing examples of violent content. This is the question. You can see where it's asking a particular question. We're understanding what happened. We're being able to understand the different sort of rates of things that are occurring. And this is something that didn't exist even like 3-4 months ago, right? This is a very new capability. It's a very powerful capability that we had to build a lot of this ourselves. Now no longer have to build as much of, so we can leverage something that's being produced by Microsoft to be successful with. Okay, and then here's how this kind of looks in a report format that you can evaluate and review and see, even save as like assets over time. Okay, so this is a ongoing process. So it's not like this is done once and you just kind of forget about it. It is something that you continue to evolve and engage. So again, when you are thinking about moving something into production, especially something that's exposed to your end customers, this is why this gets so important. And I stress the end customer thing. Even if it's an internal system and it's returning information from, say, like many of the sort of agent systems you're building now, they'll return information from a business system, not just a document. And they may even do things in that business system. And being able to know what it will do, what it won't do, and even how people can interact with it. So it's not a risk to internal compromise is an important consideration as well as you start to move up the value chain in terms of what we have capabilities of doing. Realize we're at like Internet 1.0 right now. And this is moving much faster than the Internet itself moved. So we have tremendous acceleration of the kinds of things we're capable of doing. So good example is in practice. Who did their taxes this year? If you did them on H&R Block or you did them on Intuit, what you'll notice is that they have chatbots. But I was very impressed because they, in a sense, they're only pseudo capable. Like they put some really strict guardrails around what these things were going to do or not do. So when it answered questions, it was very specific to the things that it actually was empowered to do well for the job to be done that it was enabled for. And why is that important? Well, nobody posted this year, at least I don't know of, on Intuit's chatbot answering questions about, how to repair your Ford Transit or something, right? Like it wasn't his job. It's not what it's trained on. It's not the information it has. So these exist to be successful at supporting a wide, diverse group of people that are going through their tax return. And they did a good job of putting something out that's not sort of too broad, that's answering questions successfully and has appropriate guardrails on it. HR Block actually a great article with Microsoft on how they built theirs. So something to do a little investigation on if you're looking for some, like people are saying, hey, nobody's doing this in production, or I'm not sure how they built these things. These are kinds of systems that exist in the wild for some really interesting use cases that people are getting value from. So the way I'm going to close this today, I'm not closing yet, right? But the last sort of topic on the day is talking about how this relates to human skills. And I don't think responsible AI is complete without really driving home the point of this human transition, because that's a very important component of how we build a responsible AI strategy. So the way I would characterize this is the move from a current job to next job to future job. And if you think about your current job, even, well, really most anybody, they go into the office or they go to the doctor, or they do whatever they're doing, right? Whatever their job is. There's a certain percentage of your work that's extremely repetitive. You can sort of do it in your sleep. Like you know how to do this. It's almost like relaxing to do it because you don't really think, you just do the task. And there's many individuals in your organization that have a lot of self-worth sort of baked up in their ability to perform a task. Like I do this task and that's my job. And if that task were taken away, I wouldn't be really sure what to do with my job anymore. Like, you ever have those moments where you get like 2 or 3 hours of like uninterrupted work and you're just not really sure what to do with yourself? But then people who are highly functioning will see that time and be like, this is my opportunity to work on the business. I can proactively engage my creativity and my best self with what I know about the business and to delegate rather than just doing my repetitive job. Well, that move to less repetitive work, more delegation-oriented repetitive work, and more creative work is going to be the transition that you will see in individuals as they leverage artificial intelligence. And it's going to be a sort of a true transition where like people starting to adopt things like Copilot, they get varying results. Then there'll be some people be like, that AI thing didn't work out. It's like, no, this is more about like it's in its infancy. There's some things going to work awesome. There's some things that aren't going to work awesome. And it's going to evolve over time very quickly. And you have to be learning along with it. And the people with growth mindsets are the ones that are learning actively. And then the digital natives, our kids, they're already using AI. Like go ask your son or your daughter. Like they're already using AI. And it's about governing their use when maybe the parents don't even know much about it. So the role transition is real. And this is something we need to bake into our governance teams. So how are we getting started? A lot of people have come to me and I'm doing this coaching with them. They're like, should I be a data scientist now? Should I go get my master's degree in data science? This is a very small portion of your staff that are going to be moving into that space. The main people upskilling is about enabling their creativity and work with AI, making them users of AI. And that's requiring a growth mindset. I was at a company last week talking to their executives, and they're like, we don't have a growth mindset here. I was like, whew, like we need to get one. Like your company needs a growth mindset. And I think about like what happened to Microsoft when Satya Nadella took over. Like they became a company of growth mindset. Kudos to him as a leader. Like the movement. I've been working with Microsoft for 3 CEOs. Through Bill, through Ballmer to Satya, and the transition from Ballmer to Satya could not be more stark. The enablement of creativity. This is why it's a leadership problem. This is why it is an executive problem. It is not just an IT problem. This requires your people to be more, not just leveraging an IT tool like moving to Office 365 or something. This is a much more complicated capability. And everyone deserves the ability to use it. Everyone deserves the ability to have an AI assistant to be able to accomplish more. If you think about it that way versus like just replaced by an AI assistant, or this is about enabling people to be able to be more. So those roles that are going to exist in your organization that you have to enable responsible AI around are the data engineering that's going to exist to prepare data for your teams or prepare your Office 365 environment for Copilot, the data scientists that's building a trusted model that has flaws, that has things it does well, things it doesn't do well, and having understanding of that, the AI engineer and developers that are using those foundational models to create applications that are used by teams. And then the people using the AI platforms that do everyday work as a result of the platform and as the expert on the business to be able to gain and achieve more. So where do we go from here? My recommendation is every organization needs these three things. They need governance. So they need to establish a center of excellence that balances enablement and guardrails. They have both of these two elements. They're helping the organization to leverage AI as a capability, and they are guardrailing it to make sure it doesn't fly off the cliff. They're building an ability to test their AI systems, and then they're building controls into production. They're building the guardrails into the production systems that are ultimately built by the organization. And the two that probably start first are these, right? Because you have to get off the ground. But then the fast follow is let's test it. Let's test it to make sure that what we push out into production is really something that we feel successful and good about. And think like it's a threat. Think like it's something that I need to mitigate. But do it in a way that's balanced by the idea of enablement, that we want this to be a powerful part of our business that's balanced by an idea of a red team. So where do we suggest you go from here? Well, we would love to help. So if you think that this has been interesting information, hopefully you found it valuable, we would love to be an asset to you. And the ways that we're an asset to you are at the executive level and helping drive through adoption, in creating and validating use cases and building up your center of excellence, and then enabling a sort of envisioning capability to actually go about building something. So what do? We enable strategy, we enable your center of excellence, and we enable usage of AI to accomplish more, whether it's an M365 Copilot or it's building AI systems via professional services. So when you leave, indicate how you'd like us to help you, because we would love to. And I'm sure that we can have a great partnership working together to achieve some amazing things. So before I sign off, I want to make sure I answer any outstanding questions if there are some. So happy to answer those questions. And if you have them, please go ahead and drop them in the chat or, well, yeah, drop them in the chat. And let's see, I'm not seeing any moments.
There was a question about, is this all inside Copilot Studio in the Q&A section?
No, it is not all in Copilot Studio. So Copilot Studio is like one option. Azure OpenAI Studio would be another example of that platform. So there's multiple sort of angles on how you might be building an AI system. Okay. Any other questions? Awesome. All right. Well, I have been so thrilled to have the time to spend some opportunities, to have time to spend with you today. I would love to have some more conversations in the future with your organizations. Sign up. Let's talk. See you later. Have a great rest of your day and spend some time in Microsoft Build. It's going to be a great day to learn more about what Microsoft's doing in the future too.